The 1980s gave us neon lights, synthesizers, and the golden age of the blockbuster. But lurking beneath the surface of that decade's cinematic revolution was something far more provocative. Films so controversial that governments didn't just criticize them, they erased them. This isn't a list of movies that made critics uncomfortable. These are films that were seized by authorities, condemned by religious leaders, and in some cases, ripped from private homes by police. One documentary was so threatening that anyone who showed it had to register with the FBI. Another film was directed entirely from inside a prison cell. And one production was so chaotic that its own director, writer, and stars all demanded their names be removed. From papal condemnations to theatrical firebombings, these 10 films pushed the boundaries of what cinema was allowed to say. And the powers that be pushed back hard. You won't believe number 3. Mother's Day wasn't just another low-budget horror film from the early 80s. It was a movie so disturbing that British censors refused to even consider it for 3.5 decades. Directed by Charles Kaufman and released through Trauma Entertainment, the studio infamous for pushing boundaries, Mother's Day tells the story of 3 college friends whose camping reunion goes horrifically wrong. The film's combination of dark humor and unflinching content earned it an immediate reputation as one of the most transgressive pictures of its era. The British Board of Film Classification didn't just cut scenes, they rejected it outright. Australia followed suit in 1985. In the UK, that ban held for an extraordinary 35 years, making it one of the longest prohibited horror films in British history. It wasn't until February 2015 that 88 films finally released it for British audiences. Roger Ebert famously awarded it 0 stars, yet the film became a genuine cult phenomenon. Director Charles Kaufman eventually left filmmaking entirely to become a baker. Yes, really. Today, Mother's Day streams uncut on multiple platforms and received a pristine 4K restoration in 2023. The censors who buried it are long forgotten. The film endures. But if Mother's Day spent decades in exile, the next entry was created in exile, smuggled past government censors using one of cinema's most audacious deceptions. Mapansula is the anti-apartheid film that tricked its own government into letting it be made. And then that same government banned it anyway. Director Oliver Schmitz and co-writer Thomas Moggatlane faced an impossible challenge in 1980s South Africa. They wanted to make a film critiquing the apartheid regime from a black South African perspective. The problem was that every script had to be approved by government censors. Their solution was brilliant. They submitted a fake script describing an ordinary gangster thriller. When censors visited the set, the crew filmed the approved scenes. The moment the censors left, they shot the actual political content. Schmitz later described it as a Trojan horse of a film. Mapansula screened publicly in South Africa exactly once before the regime banned it for communist content. Here's where the irony becomes absurd. Despite being forbidden in its home country, it was selected for Cannes and chosen as South Africa's official Oscar submission, a country's own Academy Award entry, banned by its own government. In 2023, a stunning 4K restoration premiered at Berlin, and the film finally screened in South African cinemas for the first time in 35 years. And yet, compared to our next entry, Mapansula got off easy. The next film didn't just face censorship. The United States government officially labeled it propaganda. If You Love This Planet is a 26-minute Canadian documentary that won an Academy Award and was simultaneously designated foreign political propaganda by the United States Department of Justice. Directed by Terry Nash for the National Film Board of Canada, the film features physician Helen Caldicott delivering a lecture on the medical consequences of nuclear conflict. The budget was roughly 70,000 Canadian dollars. On January 13, 1983, the Justice Department invoked the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Anyone planning to show the documentary was required to register with the FBI. Distributors had to report purchasers' names to federal authorities. The designation backfired spectacularly. When If You Love This Planet won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Short just weeks later, Terry Nash delivered one of the ceremony's all-time great lines. "Well, you really know how to show a foreign agent a good time." The case eventually reached the Supreme Court, where justices upheld the government's labeling power 5-3. But if that story seems surreal, the next film on our list makes it look almost ordinary. Because the next entry was directed entirely from inside a prison cell. Yol shared the Palme d'Or at the 1982 Cannes Film Festival. Its director couldn't attend the ceremony. Yilmaz Güney was serving time in a Turkish prison when he wrote the screenplay, and he escaped the country just to finish editing. Güney was already a legendary figure in Turkish cinema, an actor-turned-director whose political activism repeatedly landed him behind bars. While incarcerated, he wrote detailed shot-by-shot directing notes and smuggled them to assistant Serif Goran, who filmed the entire production according to Güney's vision. After photography wrapped, Güney escaped prison, fled to Switzerland with the negatives, and completed the final cut in Paris. The film follows 5 prisoners on temporary leave, navigating a Turkey that functions as a larger prison under military rule. The government objected to its portrayal of the 1980 coup and its depictions of Kurdish language and culture. Turkey banned Yol immediately. That ban lasted 17 years. Werner Herzog called it one of the most important films of the decade. Güney never saw his homeland again. He was granted asylum in France, but succumbed to illness in Paris in 1984 at age 47. And yet, the next entry drew condemnation from an even higher authority, not a military dictatorship, the Vatican itself. Hail Mary was publicly condemned by Pope John Paul II. He led prayers on Vatican radio to repair the insult to the holiest Virgin Mary. He had never actually watched the film. Jean-Luc Godard's reimagining of the virgin birth transposes the story to modern-day Switzerland with Mary as a gas station attendant's daughter. Godard financed the roughly $600,000 production himself after major studios refused involvement. The backlash was immediate and international. Argentina and Brazil banned the film outright. Columbia Pictures dropped U.S. distribution entirely. In Chicago, police discovered an explosive device at a theater planning to show it. In Minneapolis, a theater was burglarized and the print hidden. In Versailles, demonstrators broke into a cinema and physically sliced the film reels. A Washington Post investigation revealed that some American protests were organized by a far-right organization that had been implicated in a plot targeting the Pope himself, the same Pope who condemned the film. At the New York Film Festival, Godard delivered his legendary response. "The Pope was my press agent." Critic David Denby called it one of the most radiant and tenderly religious movies ever made. But if religious authorities condemned Hail Mary without seeing it, the next film was condemned after authorities saw only a single scene, and then they sent police to private homes. The Tin Drum won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film and shared the Palme d'Or with Apocalypse Now. 18 years later, Oklahoma police confiscated copies from video stores, libraries, and private citizens' homes. Volker Schlondorff's adaptation of Günter Grass's acclaimed novel follows Oscar, a young boy in 1930s Danzig, who refuses to grow as a protest against the rise of fascism. The film was a critical and commercial triumph, becoming one of the highest-grossing German films of the decade. In 1997, a group called Oklahomans for Children and Families brought the film to authorities. District Court Judge Richard Freeman, who reportedly viewed only a single scene, declared the Tin Drum obscene. Police confiscated copies without warrants. Anyone who possessed a videotape faced up to 20 years in prison. Federal Judge Ralph Thompson eventually overturned the ruling, declaring the seizures unconstitutional. The ironic aftermath was that the Tin Drum became the most rented foreign film in Oklahoma video stores. The Criterion Collection DVD includes a documentary about the controversy titled Banned in Oklahoma, but that was just a temporary suppression. The next entry vanished from the American market for over 2 decades. Missing won the Palme d'Or and the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Then a lawsuit made it nearly impossible to find in the United States for 20 years. Directed by Costa Gavras and starring Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek, Missing tells the true story of American journalist Charles Horman, who disappeared during the 1973 Chilean coup. The film directly implicates U.S. officials in the cover-up. Chile banned Missing for the entire Pinochet dictatorship, from 1982 until 1990. In the United States, former Ambassador Nathaniel Davis filed a defamation lawsuit in 1983. The legal pressure caused the VHS version to be pulled from the market. Missing effectively vanished from U.S. home video for more than 2 decades, not reappearing until a 2004 DVD release. Jack Lemmon once recounted receiving an invitation to the Reagan White House. The president mentioned he had seen an advanced screening. When Lemmon asked what he thought, Reagan just smiled and said nothing. A Palme d'Or winner, an Oscar winner, and a film that spent 2 decades in distribution limbo. But all of that pales in comparison to the production chaos of our next entry. And trust us, you won't believe number 3. Caligula is perhaps the most notorious film ever made. Its director disavowed it. Its screenwriter sued to have his name removed. Its stars were horrified by the finished product. And after all that, it was seized by authorities on 3 continents. Gore Vidal was paid $200,000 to write a screenplay about the infamous Roman emperor. Bob Guccione, founder of Penthouse magazine, financed the production. When Malcolm McDowell asked why a pornographer was backing the film, Vidal quipped, "Malcolm, just think of him as one of Warner Brothers." The production descended into chaos. Guccione fired director Tinto Brass before editing and hired someone else to shoot additional explicit scenes without the consent of the principal cast. Both Vidal and Brass sued to have their names removed. Helen Mirren described the final product as an irresistible mix of art and genitals. U.S. Customs confiscated footage when Guccione attempted to import it. Italian police seized prints within 6 days of the Rome premiere. The UK required over 50 cuts, and the uncut version wasn't approved until 2008. Australia didn't lift its ban until August 2021, 41 years after release. Guccione invested $22 million of his own money. He had to rent theaters himself and fight legal battles across multiple jurisdictions. In 2023, a preservationist premiered an ultimate cut at Cannes, re-edited from recovered original negatives. 70% of the footage had never been seen. But if Caligula was chaos captured on film, the next entry built its own censorship directly into the script. And then censors did exactly what the filmmakers predicted. Monty Python's The Meaning of Life won the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes. Ireland banned it anyway. At the time, Ireland had banned exactly 4 films in total. Terry Jones had directed 3 of them. The Pythons' final original film features their signature absurdist humor applied to life's biggest questions. The musical number, Every Sperm is Sacred, is a lavish production satirizing religious prohibitions on contraception, featuring Michael Palin surrounded by 63 children. Ireland censors objected and banned the theatrical release outright. The ban was functionally meaningless. The film was widely available on UK videocassette. But the film's most remarkable moment comes at the very end. After revealing the meaning of life itself, the lady presenter makes an announcement. And finally, here are some completely gratuitous images to annoy the censors and to hopefully spark some sort of controversy. The Pythons built their own censorship prediction directly into the script. Ireland obliged them perfectly. The Irish ban has become just another punchline. But our number 1 entry is no joke. It sparked the largest protest in Hollywood history, resulted in a cinema firebombing that left 13 people injured, and remains banned in 2 countries to this day. The Last Temptation of Christ drew 25,000 protesters to Universal Studios on opening day. That remains the largest single-day demonstration against a film in American history. And here's what makes it so haunting. The director was a devout Catholic who once seriously considered becoming a priest. Martin Scorsese had wanted to adapt Nikos Kazantzakis' novel for over a decade. He once said that his whole life had been movies and religion, nothing else. Paul Schrader wrote the screenplay. Willem Dafoe starred as Jesus, with Harvey Keitel as Judas and David Bowie as Pontius Pilate. Barbara Hershey, who plays Mary Magdalene, had given Scorsese the novel 16 years earlier on the set of another film. The budget was just $7 million, slashed from the original $20 million after evangelical groups flooded Paramount with 500 protest letters per day, forcing the studio to abandon the project. Universal picked it up years later. The film imagines Jesus experiencing a final temptation on the cross, a vision of an ordinary human life with marriage, children, and old age. He rejects the temptation and chooses sacrifice. The film ends with Jesus triumphantly crying out, "It is accomplished." Yet protesters condemned it as blasphemy without ever watching it. The Archbishop of Los Angeles issued condemnations without viewing it. Franco Zeffirelli called it truly horrible and completely deranged, also without watching it. At least 11 countries banned The Last Temptation of Christ outright. Israel, Greece, Mexico, Chile, Argentina, Turkey, India, Singapore, and the Philippines still ban it today, more than 35 years later. In Singapore, Kazantzakis' source novel, which had been sold in bookstores for 3 decades, was retroactively pulled from shelves. Evangelist Bill Bright publicly offered $10 million to purchase and destroy every print. more than the film's entire budget. Universal refused on First Amendment grounds. On October 22, 1988, an extremist group planted an incendiary device at the Saint Michel Cinema in Paris during a screening. 13 people were injured, 4 severely burned. The cinema didn't reopen for 3 years. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. "The film has offended those whose ideas about God and man it does not reflect," he wrote, "but then, so did Jesus." Willem Dafoe later reflected that in a world of slasher films, people got upset about a movie that simply considered the character of Jesus in a different way. Scorsese received an Oscar nomination for Best Director. Peter Gabriel's score won a Grammy. The Criterion Collection keeps it in print. The protesters have long since dispersed. The bans in Singapore and the Philippines remain. A devout man made a film about faith. Authorities called it blasphemy. History called it a masterpiece. 10 films, 10 battles against censorship that stretched across decades and continents. Some were condemned by governments. Some were condemned by religious leaders. Others were simply erased, seized from shelves and private homes by authorities who saw danger in a reel of celluloid. What united them wasn't content. It was ambition. Each of these films dared to say something that powerful institutions didn't want audiences to hear. A critique of military dictatorships, a satire of religious doctrine, a humanizing portrait of a sacred figure, a warning about nuclear annihilation, a story of resistance against apartheid smuggled past the very censors meant to stop it. The censors believed they were protecting the public. History suggests they were terrified of it. In nearly every case, the controversy only amplified the film's cultural impact. The Tin Drum became Oklahoma's most rented foreign film. If You Love This Planet won an Oscar weeks after being labeled propaganda. The Last Temptation of Christ earned a Best Director nomination despite the largest protest in Hollywood history. Were these films dangerous provocations, or were they simply ahead of their time? How many of these banned films have you actually seen? Which one shocked you the most? Drop your answers in the comments. If you made it through all 10, that like button is waiting for you. You've earned it. Subscribe for more stories about the entertainment industry's most controversial moments. Because sometimes the most important films are the ones they try to make you forget. See you in the next one.